Hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the psych coach, and today I'm going to be giving you tips about how to keep your cool as a parent. Children can be challenging. In fact, children can be challenging at any age, and part of that can be exciting because you see them develop, you see them evolve, you see them flourish into the individuals that they're going to be as they get older. But it can also be very, very taxing on your frustration tolerance. There are certain things you can do that will help boost your frustration tolerance and decrease the amount of frustration you're feeling in situations when your children aren't behaving in a way that you would like them to. It takes practice, but it's well worth doing because by engaging in what I'm talking about, you are probably also going to alleviate a secondary problem of guilt, which is also really common. Parental guilt can be really intense. And often it follows an episode where a parent has got really angry at a child or angrier than they would like to have been. So see this as twofold. One, you're increasing your frustration tolerance when your children are challenging. And two, you're going to be alleviating the horrid guilt that you feel post an event of you having a bit of an outburst. So listen up for the 5 tips. Tip number 1 is to question your expectations. A lot of the time, parents will get frustrated at their children because they are actually expecting them to behave in a way that is far older than the child's actual age. If you're getting frustrated at a toddler because they're taking a really long time to take an apron off or put their shoes on, maybe it's because you're expecting them to put them on at the speed of an adult or take them off at the speed of an adult, and that's unreasonable. Maybe you're expecting a teenager to behave in a really compliant way and they're being really defiant. So try and recognise that some of the expectations that you have are probably because you're expecting your child to behave in a way that is actually unreasonable for their age. Pay close attention to the expectations you've got. It might be that if you can identify some unrealistic expectations, you will alleviate some of the pressure you feel and the frustration you feel when they're behaving in an age-appropriate way, but not at the age you want them to be behaving at. Tip number 2 is identify your own childhood experiences. That is a really useful activity for if there are particular situations where you find yourself getting very worked up at probably a situation that doesn't warrant that level of frustration. Maybe you find meal times particularly difficult and stressful. Maybe you find confrontations or arguments quite difficult and stressful. Is it because historically you've got experiences of that? Do you really struggle with disagreement because your early experiences of disagreeing were enormous arguments that created a terrible atmosphere for days? Did you have a really bad time with meal times when you were younger because your parents wanted you to eat everything on your plate, or because you really disliked the food you were constantly given and because every mealtime felt like a battle? It's not uncommon for our experiences when we were children to play out with our parenting. And if there are particular situations that are hotspots for you, like meal times, like bath times, like when you're having a bit of a set to with a child, think about where this is coming from. Because if you've got a really intense response, it may be that actually it's coming from when you were younger. Now, insight alone won't change anything, but actually some people can find that by understanding their behaviour and seeing it for what it is and noticing the pattern and why it is the way it is, it can really alleviate some of the pressure in the current day, because in that moment you can think, okay, I know where this is coming from. This is coming from when I used to have really rough meal times, and that's why I'm frustrated in this situation. Tip number 3 is to prep yourself for difficult situations. If you know there are certain times where you're going to be more wired, maybe it's because you're under a time pressure, maybe it's because something needs to be completed. Whatever it is, know your hotspots as a parent and give yourself a rational talking to before the situation arrives. That means telling yourself, I know this is going to be difficult, I know I get frustrated, but actually I'm going to try and approach this differently. I'm going to remind myself that there is time. I'm going to remind myself that it's in my interest to be as calm as possible. I'm going to remind myself that actually if I'm calm, the child will respond in a calmer way and we'll be able to move on from it more quickly. And by giving yourself a priming before you engage in the difficult situation, you're putting yourself in far better stead for dealing with it in a calmer way. I'm not saying you're going to be dealing with situations in a Zen-like manner where way you don't get frustrated, but you'll be dealing with it in a calmer way. Tip number 4 is not to meet fire with fire. If you have a very angry teenager, if you have a very angry toddler, to meet them with the same level of intense frustration is going to create further frustration for both. De-escalating a situation is a really valuable thing you can do as a parent, and de-escalating is contingent on you managing your emotions and presenting in a calmer way than the child. If you are meeting fire with fire, the thing's going to go on for longer and get bigger. If you've got a toddler who's having a tantrum, get down to their level. Empathise with them. They're not choosing to feel like that because it's a really horrid way to feel. I recognise that as a parent, that's really frustrating because you just want to get the job done. But try and empathise and try and stay as calm as possible, because you know that if you're calmer, your child is eventually going to calm down more quickly. It's the same with teenagers. If they're really worked up, you think they're overreacting about a situation, and you start saying that as well, and you're really angry, that's just going to inflame it, and you're going to end up getting more enraged, as is your teenage child. So instead, try and empathise. Recognise that they're suffering and what they're going through is difficult. Say you want to help, and try and listen to what they need in that situation. It is tricky, but it's really valuable not to meet fire with fire. And tip number 5 is, irrespective of the age of a child, leave the situation if you need to. Obviously, that is contingent on a child not being a danger to themselves, i.e. in a bath or with dangerous things around them. But if your child is safe, and you are really frustrated and angry, you need to leave the situation, even if it is just for 5 seconds. 5 seconds to give yourself a talking to before you come back into the room. If it's an older child, perhaps you can leave for longer. The key is not to leave and angrily ruminate about why you're so frustrated, but it is to leave and buy yourself time to try and calm yourself down a little bit. It's very valuable to leave a situation, and if you can, utilise it, especially if there's another parent or adult around. It is tricky managing your frustration, and doing these things isn't going to stop you from being frustrated. You're human, you're fallible. But if you put these 5 tips into practice, you are going to rein in your frustration at the very least, and there may even be situations where you would have historically got really worked up and you are able to totally rein it in. If you do that, give yourself a massive pat on the back. It's tough being a parent. If you've enjoyed today's tips, hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and I will give you plenty more tips on how you can use psychology on a day-to-day basis.